Hello, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives and a special edition of McDuff Lives Undo the Coup. This will be part 17 in the Undo the Coup series. The idea behind Undo the Coup is that in November 22nd, 1963, the United States government was overthrown. And we have been governed by a fake government pretending to be real ever since then. We've got to undo that coup for ourselves, for our future, and for humanity so that we can restore the constitutional republic of the United States of America. So let's and welcome back, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin, and well, this is Undo the Coup. The assassination of President Kennedy in November of 1963 changed our country in so many, many ways. I think one of the principal things that it has done is to destroy the general trust in government that we had up to that day. And now we have a general mistrust of government, which serves the interests of people who would have plotted the coup. Of course, keeping that coup going has required a lot of secrecy and a lot of blackmail and a lot of restricting of information, such as the final documents from the JFK administration or even the documents from the Jeffrey Epstein files, if they still exist. Undoing the coup is part of my understanding of my father's life and early death that is written in my book, McDuff Lives. And he, having been appointed the custodian of secret ops records that were consolidated under the office, then secret, called SACSA, he was right in the middle of it. And I have to say, it's very likely that his early demise by quick cancer was the result. So I am delighted to have been able to go to Dallas, Texas over the November 20th through 23rd of 2025 and attend the JFK Historical Group Conference. As I've said before, there was last week on our show with Marcia, there was a couple of dozen really good speakers there. And the couple of them that I picked out that I want to share on the show are the ones that have shared expertise and deep research into JFK and Vietnam, because that's what my dad was in the middle of. So Dory Wley, an investment banker and part-time JFK researcher with a great passion, has delved into that very area. And I want to listen to his speech again. So I thought I would just share it today with you all so that we can have a record of it here on McDuff Lives and that we can study it together. So without further ado, let me see if I can get this video started. This is a gentleman introducing Dory Wley.
Dory brings a deep passion for uncovering the hidden connections between the assassination of President John F. Kennedy and the escalation of the Vietnam conflict. As a Dallas native, he has long felt a personal connection to this history and to the unanswered questions that continue to shape our understanding of that day. Gentlemen. Thank you. He's been an active voice in the Kennedy research community, contributing to lectures, discussions, and ongoing efforts to preserve the truth and legacy of President Kennedy. His presentation today is titled JFK in Vietnam. Please help me welcome Dory Wley.
All right, thank you very much. Nice to be here, an honor to be here. I speak about 30 to 35 times a year in the last several years on the JFK assassination. I also speak on some other topics because I take some that are more uplifting, like the American Revolution, presidents, different things. By day, I run an investment bank. I run an investment firm. I'm naturally research oriented. I got hooked when I was about 10 years old. I don't want to spend a lot of time on me. I tend to do better when I'm just discussing. Unfortunately, you won't get that today. Today, it's going to be a fairly academic exercise and something that's been a little bit of burr under my saddle lately. So we'll get started. So good day, fellow seekers of truth and colleagues. Thank you for joining me to unravel one of the most pivotal, troubling, and deliberately obscured chapters in American history, President John Kennedy's bold plan to withdraw from Vietnam. Its shocking reversal under LBJ and the haunting evidence of foreknowledge and a cover-up that persists to this day. We're here to dissect NSAM 263, its betrayal through NSAM 273, and a web of drafts, memos, and historical distortions that point to a part of a conspiracy that may have reshaped our nation's direction. This isn't just about who started or escalated Vietnam. It's about a plot that indicates foreknowledge of the assassination. This is important for all researchers because anytime historians frame a debate as JFK's war versus LBJ's war, this becomes an opportunity for all of us researchers to turn the discussion from the Vietnam War into three other discussions. One, about evidence of a conspiracy to kill John F. Kennedy. Two, about evidence of JFK's war with the CIA. And three, about JFK's war with the Pentagon. We have evidence for all. We're also going to prove beyond any reasonable doubt that the United States policy on Vietnam was reversed in the 48 hours surrounding the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. We're going to show that the reversal was written, edited, circulated, and ready for signature before Kennedy's body reached Bethesda Naval Hospital. It's not theory, it's not speculation. There's a paper trail for all of it. Many of you know this, but some of you don't. And we all need to be experts on it because this is something that continues to persist with historians and the media narrative today. Every single document I cite today is publicly available right now at the JFK Presidential Library, the National Archives, or the State Department's Foreign Relations of the United Series. If you want a copy of this speech afterwards, it's very footnoted and accurate, and I can email it to you. So let's embark on this journey together, piecing together the evidence and questioning the narratives and demanding answers. Let's start with the heart of the vision. On October 11th, 1963, he signed NSAM 263, a directive that ordered the withdrawal of 1,000 U.S. military personnel from Vietnam by the end of 63, and the major part of the U.S. military task force by the end of 1965. At the time, over 16,732 Americans, advisors were stationed in Vietnam, not troops, advisors. Advisors means CIA, supporting a faltering South Vietnamese regime against the Viet Cong insurgency. This wasn't a hasty decision, but a carefully crafted policy rooted in the McNamara-Taylor report of October 2nd, delivered personally to the president 9 days earlier on October 2nd, 1963. Kennedy did not merely accept it, he wrote in his own hand on the cover memorandum, "This action should be carried out." Picture the context. 1963 was a turbulent year. The South Vietnamese government under President Diem was crumbling, plagued by corruption and able to rally popular support, and then a coup before Kennedy could save the Dems. The Viet Cong were gaining ground, and Kennedy, a Cold War pragmatist, was growing skeptical of America's ability to win a war that South Vietnam seemed unwilling to fight. The McNamara-Taylor report, optimistic about great progress against the insurgency, offered JFK his self-scripted lifeline, a recommendation to begin phasing out U.S. military presence, training South Vietnamese forces to take over. It was talked about all year, guided by Kennedy himself to have Pentagon endorsement, and Kennedy seized the opportunity, seizing a path to extricate the U.S. from a potential quagmire. NSAM 263 was a result of over 50 high-level meetings in 1963, a testament to Kennedy's deliberate, exhaustive, and meticulous approach to Vietnam policy. At least 14 of those meetings were personally attended by Marine Lieutenant General Victor Krulak, Special Assistant to the Joint Chiefs of Staff for Counterinsurgency and Special Activities. Krulak's principal writer, Colonel Fletcher Prouty, took the raw intelligence and field reports from the Taylor-McNamara trip and produced the precise language that became NSAM 263. The directive was specific: withdraw the troops by December, aim for a complete exit by 65, make no public announcement to avoid signaling weakness to Saigon or the Viet Cong. This is key because he didn't want the message out. The secrecy wasn't cowardice, it was strategic, balancing domestic anti-communist pressures with election planning and with foreign policy goals. Krulak and Prouty were the Pentagon anchors for the withdrawal plan. Bundy, Dean Rusk, and the State Department hawks were deliberately kept at arm's length because Kennedy did not trust their appetite for deeper American involvement. But it goes further. Despite ongoing historical mainstream perspectives, Kennedy's commitment to withdrawal was unwavering, corroborated by those close to him. His brother, Robert Kennedy, later said JFK planned a full exit after the '64 election, wary of sparking a Joe McCarthy Red Scare if he acted sooner. McNamara, in his '95 memoir, in retrospect, confirmed JFK's determination to withdraw all major forces by 1965, regardless of South Vietnamese progress. Ted Sorensen's, JFK's speechwriter, wrote in Counselor that Kennedy distrusted Pentagon calls for escalation, believing Vietnam was a losing proposition. Art Schlesinger Jr., his special assistant, echoed this, noting JFK's frustration with military advisors pushing for deeper involvement. These accounts and many more, written before Vietnam became a national tragedy, carry immense weight, untainted by hindsight or political agendas. Now let's hear JFK's own words on September 2nd, 1963. He tells Walter Cronkite on CBS, in the final analysis, it's their war. They are the ones who have to win it or lose it. We can help them. We can give them equipment. We can send our men out as advisors, but they have to win it, the people of Vietnam. A week later, on September 9th, he told NBC, Chet Huntley and David Brinkley, I don't think that unless there's a greater effort made by the South Vietnamese government to win popular support, that the war can be won out there. These weren't offhanded remarks. They were deliberate signals of a policy shift they had been working again on all year. Broadcast to the nation, Senator Mike Mansfield, a trusted confidant, recalled JFK confided in '63 that he'd withdraw after the election despite the political cost. Kenny O'Donnell, his appointment secretary, quoted him saying, in '65, I'll be damned everywhere as a communist appeaser, but I don't care. If I tried to pull out completely now, we'd have another Joe McCarthy Red Scare in our hands. This was a president resolute in his vision to end America's role in Vietnam. That was the policy of the United States government on the morning of Thursday, November 21st, 1963, when President Kennedy left the White House for Texas. NSAM 263's implications were profound. Strategically, it shifted responsibility to South Vietnam and challenging the Pentagon and CIA hawks who saw Vietnam as a Cold War battleground. Politically, it risked backlash from anti-communist hardliners in Congress and the public who equated withdrawal with weakness. Some, like Prouty, argue this defiance of the military-industrial complex made JFK a target of powerful interests. It certainly didn't help. Whether you see NSAM 263 as a transformative vision or a pragmatic first step, it was Kennedy's blueprint to avoid a war that would later claim millions of lives. Now the betrayal. On November 26, 1963, just 4 days after the assassination and 1 day after his funeral, President Lyndon Johnson signed NSAM 273, a directive that obliterated Kennedy's withdrawal plan. Drafted by National Security Advisor McGeorge Bundy, NSAM 273 claimed to uphold the withdrawal goals of NSAM 263, citing the October 2nd White House statement. But this was a deception. The document's course shifted U.S. policy to win their contest against the externally directed and supported communist conspiracy, committing America to escalation. By 65, LBJ had deployed 250,000 troops to Vietnam, nullifying JFK's timeline. The Pentagon Papers later described the 63 withdrawal of 1,000 troops as a mere accounting exercise. How did this reversal happen so swiftly? The answer lies in the drafts of NSAM 273, drafts that predate JFK's death and point to foreknowledge at the highest levels. But first, we must go to Hawaii, the Honolulu Conference on November 20th and 21st, 1963. 48 hours before the assassination, the highest ranking civilian and military officials responsible for Vietnam policy gathered at CINCPAC headquarters in Honolulu, Hawaii. The official purpose of the conference was implementation of U.S. policy following the Diem coup. In other words, how to carry out NSAM 263, Kennedy's withdrawal plan. The attendees included Russ McNamara Bundy, John McCone, Director of CIA, Bill Bundy, his brother, who worked for the Department of Defense, and the Pentagon, Roger Hilsman, Assistant Secretary of State, General Paul Harkins, Admiral Harry Felt, Michael Forrestal, the NSC staff, and approximately 30 other senior military and civilian officials. Victor Krulak was present in Honolulu, but was not asked to draft or contribute to the follow-on NSAM 273 memorandum, and neither was Prouty. Their exclusion is itself very revealing. While the conference was still in session, while the official agenda was supposedly about implementing Kennedy's withdrawal order, McGeorge Bundy began writing a new NSAM memo that would completely reverse 263. The 5 drafts, JFK Presidential Library Folder, JFK NSF 342-014, contains 5 distinct drafts that would become NSAM 273, all dated November 21st through 22nd. Each draft shows a deliberate pivot away from the withdrawal, crafting with chilling precision before JFK's burial on the 25th. Here's the chronology. On the 21st, approximately between 1 and 3 o'clock Eastern Time, 8 and 10 o'clock Hawaii time, McGeorge Bundy en route back or arrival in D.C. First appearance of the phrase, assist the people and government of South Vietnam to win the contest. The Honolulu conference, attended by the key advisors, focused on implementing the withdrawal plan, discussed logistics for the pullout. Yet this draft emphasized expanded military aid and winning the war, ignoring withdrawal timelines. Handwritten notes by Bundy on the draft, verified by National Archives handwriting analysis, prioritized counterinsurgency operations, including covert operations against North Vietnam. Withdrawal language is still present, but already weakened. Why was Bundy drafting an escalation policy when the conference agenda was withdrawal? This draft, marked top secret, shows no trace of JFK's intent. Draft 2 on November 21st, the afternoon of 6 p.m. Eastern Time. This version builds on the first, adding clauses for economic and military support to the post-Diem South Vietnamese government. These edits sidelined 263's withdrawal goals, emphasizing a long-term U.S. presence. It was then circulated to Bill Bundy and Hillsman at State Department for comments. It deleted the paragraph on unity to avoid public recrimination. The Honolulu Conference minutes available at the National Archives confirm no discussion of escalation, only withdrawal logistics. So again, why was William Bundy pushing this shift? And pushing this shift before Kennedy is shot? Pushing this shift while Kennedy is president? Without his knowledge. On draft 3, the 23rd, 10 a.m. Eastern, Hillsman returns memo with minor changes lodged as received post-assassination. Typed annotations attributed to Bill Bundy, his brother, and Hillsman refined aid commitments focusing on stabilizing Saigon after Diem's coup. On the 25th, draft 4, 2 p.m. Eastern meeting, the further edits post LBJ's L24 meeting, belligerent tone noted by aides, changes to paragraphs 4 on unity emphasis and 7 on covert ops versus North Vietnam. This is from the LBJ library stenographer log. And then on November 26th, we have the final draft at 6 p.m. This draft incorporated all the revisions, solidifying the escalation policy. No copy of any of these 5 drafts were ever sent to President Kennedy. No record exists of him ever seeing a single page. McGeorge Bundy's exact movements, we've got those when he went to Honolulu, when he came back. I'm going to skip those for a minute. But here's where it gets explosive. 95% of the memo is intact from the first draft or pre-assassination. In a 1988 interview with historian John Newman, McGeorge Bundy dropped a bombshell. When asked who directed the changes to the November 21st drafts, Bundy replied, the president. Newman pressed, which president? Bundy clarified, Lyndon Johnson. Then vice president, not JFK. This admission, documented in JFK and Vietnam, confirms that LBJ personally provided edits to the NSAM 273 drafts on November 21st before Kennedy's assassination. And let that sink in. Let that resonate. The vice president was actively shaping a policy to reverse JFK's withdrawal plan while Kennedy was still alive. We all know how close those two were. No records show JFK approving or seeing those drafts were directly contradicted his November 21st discussions, and we know he left at 10 a.m. on the 21st for Texas. The Honolulu conference, as detailed in declassified cables, focused solely on implementing NSAM 263. Yet Bundy, Pentagon staff, and LBJ were crafting escalation. It is highly unlikely that this complete reversal, for which Kennedy had directed personally all year, was reversed without more than 24 hours of forethought by Bundy, LBJ, and Pentagon warhawks, while all were spread out in DC, Honolulu, and Texas. So most likely being spread out as part of the cover. It had to be planned much further in advance, and it's even more unlikely and preposterous that Kennedy knew and endorsed it. What does this mean? And the November 21st drafts, edited by LBJ, Pentagon warhawks, and Bundy before JFK's death, suggest foreknowledge of a policy shift. The marginal note in draft 3, potentially LBJ's, aligns with this hawkish stance. Though handwriting remains unconfirmed, and in my opinion, it's not his because he was in Texas, the ARRB analysis, inclusive analysis, doesn't negate the tone of the draft, which echoes LBJ's documented rhetoric. These drafts, accessible via the JFK's and related materials section, reveal a premeditated effort to undermine JFK's vision. Why was LBJ editing NSAM 273 before he became president? Why did Bundy pivot from the Honolulu agenda? These questions point out to a deliberate plan. with Bundy as the orchestrator and LBJ and Pentagon Warhawks as key players. Now I want to shift to a couple of books that I picked up that were put out in 22. So I get invited to a book review, and this is Mark Silverstone. No, not this one. This is Mark Upgrove, Incomparable Grace. I thought, I got to go to this because I know Mark Upgrove runs the LBJ library. Why is he writing a book on Kennedy? Instantly, my NSAM memo discrepancy pops into my head, and I go, and sure enough, it's pretty interesting. Silverstone exemplified this betrayal in an interestingly coincidental 60th anniversary time books on JFK and Vietnam. Upgrove references NSAM 263 in his book without putting a copy of it, Incomparable Grace, JFK and the Presidency, but misleads readers by framing it as a tentative conditional plan tied to South Vietnamese success. He dismisses JFK's withdrawal as a myth, ignoring primary sources like McNamara's memoir, RFK's interviews, Assassination Records Review Board, confirmation of JFK's withdrawal plan, all these other things we've talked about and more I'm going to give you. Most damningly, Upgrove admits NSAM 273, erasing LBJ's rapid policy reversal. Why does this matter? Upgrove's leadership of the LBJ Foundation, which supports the Presidential Library in Austin, Texas, gives him influence over 45 million pages in documents. The library, administered by the National Archives, curates exhibits and programs that emphasize LBJ's civil rights achievements while downplaying his Vietnam failures. This institutional bias shapes narratives and marginalizing documents like NSAM 273 that expose LBJ's role not only in Vietnam escalation, but in foreknowledge of the assassination. That's the key. Upgrove's omissions aren't just sloppy. They align with a legacy protection agenda. Why else would he write a defamation book on JFK and mockingly call it Incomparable Grace as he attacks JFK's legacy in writing? Mark Silverstone, a 2022 book, timing's interesting. The Kennedy Withdrawal, Camelot and the American Commitment to Vietnam, is equally problematic and mocking. Silverstone argues 263 was a strategic maneuver to pressure South Vietnam, not a firm withdrawal plan. He emphasizes bureaucratic ambiguities in JFK's public anti-communist rhetoric, sidelining private accounts from Mansfield, O'Donnell, and others that confirm Kennedy's resolve. Like Upgrove, Silverstone admits NSAM 273, obscuring the stark contrast between JFK's de-escalation and LBJ's escalation. These historians are not just misinterpreting, they're distorting history to sanitize LBJ's legacy. Critics love to freeze Robert Kennedy in April '64. Of course, he's got to still be in shock, right? When he told an oral history interviewer that his brother had no intention of pulling out of Vietnam. I've seen it time and time again. Let that same Robert Kennedy and the same interviewer 4 years later destroy that claim himself. Listen to what he said in '68 on camera, on the record, knowing the stakes. In the February '68 interview with Cronkite, aired nationally, he says the president, JFK, felt that he had a strong, overwhelming reason for American involvement, but he also felt that he had been reelected, and if he had been reelected in '64, he would have pulled out of Vietnam. He would have settled it diplomatically, or he would have withdrawn. In December '67, interview with John Bartlow Martin, the same historian he spoke to in '64, he said at the time of his death, President Kennedy had decided that after the '64 election, he would withdraw from Vietnam. He was going to take the political heat and get out. He didn't want a McCarthy-type red-baiting campaign saying he lost Vietnam like Truman was accused of losing China. Quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, in March and April of 64, Robert Kennedy was still Attorney General and probably didn't have his hands around the situation yet. On May 15th, 1968, campaign appearance in California. My brother was going to get out after he was reelected. He told me that personally. He said after 64, we're coming home. He was afraid that if he moved before the election, the Republicans would say he was soft on communism or another who lost China crusade. That's Robert Kennedy, the person closest to John, telling Americans 67 and 68 that the policy he described in 64 was never permanent. It was a temporary political holding pattern until after the 64 election, after which JFK intended full withdrawal, damn the political cost. So when someone hands you that 1964 quote and says, see, JFK was in to win, you now have the perfect response. Robert Kennedy already answered that for us in 67 and 68. His brother planned to end the entire war entirely after the re-election. The only reason he didn't move sooner was to avoid a McCarthy-style witch hunt. Those are RFK's own words, not mine, not anyone else's, given when he had nothing left to protect and everything to lose. That's the truth the cherry-picking historians don't want you to hear. Another example, quote, and finally, let me kill once and for all the favorite gotcha of every JFK was a hawk revisionist, the 1963 September interviews with Walter Cronkite and David Brinkley. They love to quote two sentences, rip it bleeding from the context of the conversation. To Cronkite, I don't agree with those who say we should withdraw in the final analysis. It is their war. To Huntley and Brinkley, I don't think that unless a greater effort is made by the South Vietnamese to win popular support, the war can be won. I don't agree that we should withdraw. That would be a mistake. That's it. That's the entire proof that JFK was committed to victory at cost. But here's what they admit, for example. Brinkley, are you withdrawing American forces? JFK, no, I think that would be a mistake at this time. The revisionists stop the tape right there. They don't mention that they are advisors, i.e. CIA, as there are no troops. And NSAM 263 was not policy yet. What they never play is the sentence JFK added immediately after no, I think that would be a mistake at this time. What did he say? He said, quote, we are not sending combat troops. We are not sending American boys to fight this war. That is the responsibility of the South Vietnamese. And what happened exactly 3 weeks later on October 2nd? JFK approved the McNamara-Taylor report in his public announcement, and the bulk of U.S. personnel to return home by the end of 65, precisely because he had concluded the South Vietnamese were not making the required political effort. So when JFK said withdrawal would be a great mistake on September 9th, he was speaking on September 9th before the McNamara-Taylor trip, before the final proof that Saigon would not reform, and before he issued the actual withdrawal order on October 11th. The interviews were not a pledge to stay forever. They were a conditional warning, fix your government or we're out. Saigon didn't fix it. JFK issued the withdrawal order. That's not hawkishness. That's the exact opposite of escalation. Any historian or pundit who quotes those two sentences without the conditional clauses, without the September 9 insistence on no combat troops, and without the October 11th withdrawal order is not correcting the record. They're mutilating it. They're being dishonest. They dishonor truth. The full tapes and transcripts have been public for 60 years. There is no excuse. Consider Dick Goodwin. Dick worked in both administrations, as most all of you know. Here he is quoted in his book, Remembering America, New York, Harper and Row in 1988. Quote, in later years, LBJ and others in his administration would assert that they were merely fulfilling the commitment in Vietnam of previous presidents. The claim was untrue. During the first half of 65, I attended meetings where the issues of escalation were discussed. Not once, not one time did any participant claim that we had to send combat troops because of previous commitments. The claim of continuity was reserved for public justification, intended to conceal the fact that a major policy change was being made. This matters because historical distortions undermine the credibility of our entire field. When scholars like Upgrove and Silverstone misrepresent NSAM 263 or omit NSAM 273, they foster public distrust and academic rigor. Readers begin to question whether historians serve truth or agenda. It's a big problem. The consequences are profound. These narratives normalize the Vietnam War's escalation as inevitable, deflect scrutiny from LBJ and Bundy, and hinder accountability for not only a conflict that cost 58,000 American lives and millions of Vietnamese, but also foreknowledge of the assassination of itself. No president or general directs NSAM's reversing presidential policy without support of the active president. It is even more absurd to assume they would reverse one. As JFK researchers, we must challenge these distortions. The LBJ libraries, while a treasure trove, may selectively highlight documents that favor his legacy, burying those like NSAM 273. It's not just academic, it's a continuation of the cover-up. So some more background I want to hit you with. And to guide us through this labyrinth, we turn to the most credible whistleblower we have on this, which is Colonel Prouty, a man who didn't just observe the gears of power, he helped turn them for decades before he exposed the rot. Prouty wasn't just some armchair theorist spinning yarns from a basement. Born in 1917, he flew missions in World War II, served as a key liaison for the Pentagon and the CIA, and rose to Chief of Special Operations for the Joint Chiefs of Staff under Presidents Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson. He was the original Mr. X deep throat source who inspired Sutherland's character in Oliver Stone's JFK. Prouty drafted national security memos that shaped U.S. covert operations worldwide. He knew the players, Dulles, CIA directors, Joint Chiefs, and when he spoke of Vietnam, the CIA's black ops and the forces that conspired against JFK, it wasn't speculation, it was a discussion and confession from the inside. And in interviews where he lays bare the machinations around NSAM 263, Prouty's voice cuts through the fog like a searchlight. He didn't profit from controversy. He risked everything to tell us what they buried. Even critics who nitpick details concede his insider access. And today we'll see why his revelations on JFK's withdrawal plan aren't just history, they're a blueprint for understanding the deep state that still haunts us. To sharpen this blade further, let's draw on meticulous work of researcher Greg Burnham, building on Prouty's foundation, uncovers timelines and anomalies that scream premeditation, showing not just that JFK planned to exit Vietnam, but that the machinery to reverse it was grinding before the shots in Dealey Plaza. Picture this, a young president inaugurated in '61 inherits a simmering crisis in Southeast Asia from Eisenhower. But Ike himself, the five-star general who led Allied invasion of Europe, pulls JFK aside in January of that year in a private White House meeting. Eisenhower authors the famous military-industrial complex farewell address, warns his successor, do not send American combat troops to Vietnam. That's from Ike. Bear in mind, Ike says, according to notes from the session and later accounts by participants like George Bundy, you will find that intervention will be a long and uphill struggle. Eisenhower had refused to bail out the French at Dien Bien Phu in '54 precisely because he saw the quagmire for what it was, a colonial trap that would bleed America dry. This wasn't abstract caution, it was a hard-won wisdom from the man who'd orchestrated D-Day. JFK didn't stop there. He sought counsel from the Titans of World War II, who had stared down greater odds. General Matthew Ridgway, Army Chief of Staff under Truman and Ike, had already penned a scorching 54 memo against U.S. ground intervention in Indochina. quote, to introduce U.S. forces would be a strategic disaster on the order of the Pyrrhic victory. Ridgway wrote, predicting endless escalation and no clear win. He reiterated this to JFK in 1961, thundering that Vietnam was, quote, a can of worms you should leave closed, end quote. Then there was Omar Bradley, the GI's general, who commanded U.S. ground forces in Europe and later chaired the Joint Chiefs. Bradley warned JFK flat out, quote, no American boots on Vietnamese soil. We must not repeat the mistakes of Korea, end quote, echoing Ridgway's fears of a meat grinder that would devour lives and treasure without end. These weren't peaceniks, they were warriors who had liberated nations, and they all sang the same tune. Vietnam is a fool's errand. JFK listened. His policy, advisors only, no combat troops, no escalation, a phased withdrawal to let South Vietnam stand on its own. But standing in his way, the CIA, with its covert empire building and a Pentagon brass hungry for the next big war. So enter Prouty, the architect of JFK's counter move. In 61, just months into the administration, Kennedy, fresh off with the Bay of Pigs fiasco, firing the top 3 guys in CIA, they had lied to him about his chances. He decides to clip the agency's wings. He recalls General Maxwell Taylor from retirement to head a special group on counterinsurgency. And Prouty, he's tapped to draft NSAM 55, quote, Relations of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to the President in Cold War Operations. Signed on June 28, this memo was a masterpiece of bureaucratic judo. It transferred responsibility for paramilitary ops from the CIA to the military, specifically the JCS, where he could have some more control. No more rogue CIA cowboys running black ops in Vietnam, Laos, or anywhere else. The agency was demoted to intelligence support only. Prouty recalls JFK dictating the language himself. The Joint Chiefs will hereafter provide all necessary military assistance and advice to the president. This wasn't paperwork, it was war with the CIA. JFK was wresting control from Dulles' ghost machine, ensuring that if America fought shadows in Southeast Asia, it would be under his command, not the spooks, or at least so he thought. Fast forward to early 63, where Burnham uncovers a piece of the smoking gun in the Pentagon's bowels. Marjorie Alice Cooley Judge, a 20-year veteran manpower analyst, tasked with 5-year projections for troop call-ups, drafts, and attrition. In April of 63, months before the McNamara-Taylor trip, she receives a direct presidential order to scrap her escalatory forecasts and redraw them for a complete U.S. withdrawal from Vietnam by the end of 64. In 2 decades, her numbers had never been touched. This wasn't a tweak. It was a total pivot, distinguished military pullout by 64 from the final CIA mop-up by 65. Of the 16,500 Americans then in country, most went CIA-linked shadows in uniform. JFK's directive, clear the board. By fall of 63, the M regime was crumbling. Corrupt, gone. Let's see. JFK's doubling down on withdrawal, and here's where Prouty and Krulak, the tough as nails Marine generals who head the JCS Vietnam Task Force, become the unsung heroes. And for months, they work on NSAM 263. I'm going to skip over a bunch of stuff because I'm running out of time here. But what I want to hit, I have too much to talk about, unfortunately. You poor people don't get to sit there and listen to me read to you. There's a lot more evidence that I was going to hit up, but I think what I want to do is hit one. Let me do this. Now, a word on critics, and I hate to name names, but like John Newman, who's JFK in Vietnam, I totally respect. Newman's a meticulous scholar, ex-NSA analyst who mapped Cold War cables, but where he clashes with Prouty on whether JFK was truly committed to withdrawal or just posturing, Newman errs by over-relying on declassified fragments from the CIA. Newman argues 263 was symbolic, along with the other modern historians. Prouty, who wrote the darn thing, counters with the full context. dictation from JFK, Krulak logs, RFK 68 confessions, and onward and so forth. I think I'm going to go with Prouty. And I want to end with posts of these books and countless others anywhere they appear, criticizing their scholarship when you see them. You now know the truth and the narrative. The untruths that are there are that are to excuse LBJ and the military industrial complex for the Vietnam War and the assassination itself by blaming the man they murdered in the first place with malice and forethought. The legacy and assassination of JFK, the tragedy of Vietnam, the accountability of the government for the past, for the present, and for the future depends on us.
Hey, Dory, great presentation. Do you have that in a form I can get, like an email or something?
Yeah, D. Wley, W-I-L-E-Y. There's not. I'm easy to find on the internet because of my strange name. I'm named after a fish.
Right, so what's your email? What's your email for people?
It's dwiley@cstreetcap.com.
Okay.
Feel free.
All right, I'll stop it there. Yeah, you have to, Brightmore, if you'd like to get a transcript, you need to email D. Wley, and I found him on the internet. He's very easy. His name is Dory A. Wley, and he is a investment consultant. So, yeah, very easy to find him. Sorry, I don't have it at hand. I think he just said it, but anyway, Brightmore, enjoying your comments, and everyone else, thank you for chiming in. You know, it's a battle that's going on right now. I just fought that battle myself this morning with Grok, who will continue to insist that you know, there's no evidence that Kennedy was going to withdraw. And you know, the fact is, LBJ and the military-industrial complex were working hand in glove to make sure that the gravy train continued to flow. And the issue of whether to withdraw or not should always be addressed in terms of withdrawal who. The only people there were special advisors, i.e. CIA and technical advisors. If there were other people there, they were working in secret or under CIA supervision. The U.S. military did not enter Vietnam during President Kennedy's lifetime. So all they were talking about withdrawing was the special advisors, not combat troops. Combat troops were not even in the discussion. This battle between the narrative, quote unquote, which you can find on Grok or any of the other GPT and all of the rest of the AIs, because they all have the same narrative, as I understand. They have a profit motive. They want to tell the most juicy story so that people will continue to click on their AI. The profit model, I explained this in my recent Minefields called Grok is an Intelligence Operation. So check that out. One other big takeaway that I have from this presentation is to continue to study the distinction between counterinsurgency and covert or paramilitary operations. SACSA was created to be the umbrella operation of both. Special Assistant for Counterinsurgency and Special Operations, Special Activities it's called, you know, even more obscure name, but Special Ops, Special Activities. This is Green Beret, this is the Swift boats, and this is the Plan 34A. And you know, I would recommend that you watch, if you can, the 6 parts so far that I've done specifically on SACSA. Um, I believe that there is a book to be written. I don't know if I will be the person that writes it, but we've got to allow this story that Dory Wley just put together very well, I think, to percolate in the American psyche so that we can, in this way, stimulate the Congress to hold hearings, not only to uncover the papers of who pulled the trigger or who ordered the hit, which is the subject of so much, speculation as well as dogged research for 62 years now, but to focus on what happened next, to focus on, oh, that was a coup d'etat. So therefore, we went in and we spent, 50,000 lives and billions of dollars on the military-industrial complex, on helicopters. For goodness sake, look at Bell Helicopter and how they made money. The connections that are pointed out in all the previous work I've done, reading Fletcher Prouty's Secret Team, Fletcher Prouty's The Assassination of JFK, and so many other books that do fortify the story that Dory Wley has just shared. So I am glad to have had the opportunity to re-listen to that important presentation, and I will get a copy of it in writing because it sounds like there was some that he did not read. So I want to get the whole thing, and hopefully I'll get him as a guest on my show one day. I am certainly going to reach out. All right. Thanks again, everybody. And I will see you on Friday with Marcia for our weekly wrap up. I might do a show on Thursday. I haven't decided yet. I've got some ideas.